Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for coming this evening. This is going to be a great lecture tonight. Wanted to just give a shout out real quick to TechSource, who has been sponsoring our 24-25 lecture series. Rachel, our educator, is out of town. She's in Europe, so that's why I'm doing this, so you get second best on this one. Sorry about that. Tonight, I wanted to definitely give a big welcome to Tom Ribe, who I've known for quite a few years. We met back in Bandelier probably 15 years ago, and his wife Monique, doing tours and everything. There are so many things on these 2 pages that I could talk to you about Tom and his accolades, but one of the biggest things is that Tom Ribe is a writer and environmental advocate based in northern New Mexico. He's the author of Inferno by Committee, A History of the Cerro Grande Fire. Tom's lecture is based obviously on this book here tonight, and we will have a book signing directly afterwards, so I'm not going to get in the way anymore. Let's welcome Tom.
All right. Well, thank you all for coming out tonight. It's great to be back in my hometown. I remember I did a similar talk to this back when I released the first version of this book back in 2010. And that was the green version, and the new book that we have in the back there is called Inferno by Committee 2. You'll notice the 2, that's the latest and greatest and the final version of this book. So anyway, I remember talking in this very room, this beautiful room. I can remember being a little kid eating dinner in here. It's just I also want to thank the Los Alamos Historical Society for the work they do to interpret the history of Los Alamos with the Manhattan Project National Historic Park and also the Bradbury Science Museum. The Historical Society serves thousands of visitors every year from all over the world, and it's a tremendous service to the community for those people who are have lived here and don't come downtown in the middle of the day. You may not see all those strangers that come through and learn a lot from them. It's been 25 years now since the Cerro Grande fire plunged Los Alamos into a disaster, burning homes, closing the lab for 2 weeks, and causing everybody immeasurable stress. For those of you who were here, you will recall the smoke from the mountains south of town, growing for 2 days and becoming a black column that began to gobble up the forest between Los Alamos and Cerro Grande. So as all of you probably know, Cerro Grande is the highest point in Bandelier National Monument. It's the next peak back from Parrito Mountain where the ski area is. So that's where the name of the fire came from. I'm sorry, I'm going to have to be here, so I'm sorry to block your view. For those of you who lost homes, it was a wrenching experience. The laboratory and the country lost historic buildings such as a lot of the V-site buildings that underpin the Manhattan Project's physical history. Billions of dollars worth of property were lost, and sadly, the Cerro Grande fire was inevitable, and if anything, it could have been a lot worse. Why were the Cerro Grande and the Dome fires and the Las Conchas fires such ferocious fires? Why have so much of the Jemez Mountains and the Sangre de Cristos across the valley from Los Alamos burned to the point where tens of thousands of acres of former forests are now brushy grasslands? For those of us who have been in this area for a few decades, we know that the big hot fires like these were virtually unknown before 1996. The high Jemez around the Valles Caldera was always a green forested area, wet in the summer, snowy in the winter, and now it has big fire scars. So what happened? For years, I worked as an on-call AD firefighter for Bandelier National Monument. I helped manage many prescribed fires and burned thousands of acres on the north and the west sides of Bandelier. When the Valles Caldera was transferred to the National Park Service in 2014, I helped NPS crews carry out some burns on the Valles Caldera. I also helped with prescribed burning in Yosemite National Park, and I helped with an earlier Cerro Grande burn in 1985 or so. And that was interesting. It was going to be the same burn that happened in 2000, but we had to abandon it because it was so wet we couldn't get anything to burn. That was in the fall. So I saw that the Bandelier fire staff knew what they were doing. So when the Cerro Grande prescribed fire got out of control and the media said the park staff was at fault, I decided to do a little research and find out what really happened. My research resulted in Inferno by Committee and Inferno by Committee 2. And I think it's important that people understand why Cerro Grande and the Las Conchas fire and the Hermit Peak fire happened and why more big fires like these will continue to happen into the future. The crew that lit the Cerro Grande prescribed fire made mistakes. And the fire got out of control because of their mistakes and the mistakes of others in the firefighting establishment. I go into great detail about that in my book. So if you want the gory details, you have to read the book. But the thing is, the fire crews were absolutely doing the right thing in theory, but they got the timing and the details wrong. They were trying to right the wrongs of generations of people in New Mexico who had unknowingly turned the Jemez Mountains from a fire-adapted landscape into a powder keg. We had crossed a line in time, and methods of managing wildland fire over the last century would no longer work in 2000. It was a harsh lesson and one that the national wildland firefighting community paid attention to. I don't know how well you can see this, but what we have here is there's the Valles Caldera. Here's Los Alamos over here. All of this red area is area that's been burned by various high severity fires since 1996. Since the Cerro Grande fire, we've had more large high severity fires. We experienced the 2011 Las Conchas fire, which burned 158,000 acres, and the Hermit Peak Calf Canyon fire in the Sangre de Cristo that burned 321,000 acres. For those of you who've lived here very long, you've seen the changes. So what happened? Why do we have monster fires killing thousands of acres of forest around us? As Melanie Stansbury would say, this is not normal. We must look way back in time to understand what happened to our forest. The Pueblo people have been living on and near the Parito Plateau and the Jemez Mountains for at least 3,000 years. They may have lit fires purposely, but their fire contributions were lost among the incredible number of lightning fires that happened regionally. They abandoned the Parito Plateau because of drought and resource shortages just before the Spanish arrived in 1540. Undoubtedly, they had a big impact on vegetation and wildlife populations because of firewood gathering and hunting for meat all the time. The Spanish arrived and introduced cows, sheep, and horses into this area in 1540. None of these animals had ever been here before. Coronado brought several thousand head of livestock to New Mexico. In 1826, James Patty surveyed the Gila River drainage and said that after one day of travel, quote, "we were fatigued by the difficulty of getting through the high grass which covered the heavily timbered bottom." Joseph Rothrock in the 1860 Wheeler survey described, quote, "luxuriant bunch grasses covering the ground as thickly as it could stand." And he was in northern New Mexico. Aldo Leopold said, "all of the old settlers agree that at the time of settlement, stirrup-high grama grasses covered the region, and this grass extended out into the Rio Grande Valley. Lightning fires would burn over tens of thousands of acres in the mountains and then burn out into the valley. Nobody put them out, nobody worried about it. These fires burned close to the ground and nurtured forest and grassland alike." The Hispano homesteaders that lived on the Pardo Plateau at the time of the Los Alamos Ranch School had small herds of cows and sheep. When the railroad arrived in 1880, many trainloads of sheep were released into northern New Mexico. There were 5 million sheep here in 1890. These animals spread out over the whole region, from the highest country down into the valleys, pulling up grass by the roots and laying the soil bare. 500,000 cows were released at the same time over northern New Mexico. Keep in mind that there were no regulation of grazing at this time of any kind. W.C. Bishop brought 3,000 cows to the Los Alamos area in 1860. Combined with sheep herds owned by others, his cows helped ruin the grass that had carried light fires over the land for thousands of years. Unfortunately for Bishop and his cows, but fortunately for the land, the winter of 1866 was so harsh that it killed most of Bishop's cows, and he left. Meanwhile, the logger Harry Buckman arrived in 1898 and cut down tens of thousands of old-growth ponderosa pine trees. Ponderosa pine and Douglas fir trees that were all over the Los Alamos area and all on the hills up above here. He dragged the logs out behind horses, gouging the land and leaving logging debris everywhere. He loaded the wood onto trains in White Rock Canyon at Buckman Crossing. Eventually, he cashed out and left for Oregon. Tree ring data shows that the last widespread natural fire burned in the Bandelier area around 1900. This is one of Craig Allen's graphs. And what you've got here, each one of these peaks is a large fire, a large regional fire. And so you can see the dates here going all the way back to 1700. And they reconstructed this by looking at fire scars in big old trees. And they've actually reconstructed the history, the climate history of the Southwest by going back even farther than this. But what we need to see here is that the fires are declining right about 1900. So here's the livestock destroying the grasslands. And then here for the rest of it, we don't have any fires happening naturally anymore. These are all lightning fires. It's possible some of them were lit by Pueblo people, but these were lightning fires. So here we have no more fires starting in 1900. The Pardo Plateau in eastern Jemez was overgrazed, and the forests were tattered thickets by 1900. Sheep grazing continued, including in Bandelier, until the 1930s. Sheep decimated the ground cover. Much of that bare soil around the tree stumps filled with small seedlings. And with no fire to thin them, they grew thick across hundreds of thousands of acres. So you get the picture of bare ground, little trees sprouting up and growing into thickets. The U.S. Forest Service arrived in 1905 with the mission of regulating livestock grazing on the public lands and extinguishing all forest fires. Their fire suppression allowed tree thickets to continue to grow, and they ultimately created the fuel for the incredibly hot fires that we have been experiencing today. Oops. There's a thicket for you. That's what we call a dog hair thicket. By 1996, we had crossed a line in time. The unusual wet 1970s and 1980s were over, and the drought had set in, and a drought that continues to this day. Craig Allen, the forest ecology researcher, put it this way, quote, "Drier winter conditions abruptly returned to the Southwest in 1996, with near continuous and ongoing drought, along with historically novel warmer temperatures. As a result, over the past 29 years, southwestern forests and woodlands have been subject to reduced plant available water, sharply reducing tree growth, much more extensive and severe fire activity, and major pulses of drought-induced tree mortality, including bark beetle outbreaks. The scale of these recent tree killing disturbances is unprecedented in the Southwest since historical record keeping began around 1900, and almost certainly is unprecedented since the regional megadrought of the late 1500s. So Craig goes on to say that the size of the recent high severity fires is almost certainly unprecedented over the last 9,000 years. As of 2025, 50% of our forest trees have died in the Southwest. So our forests are drying out. In the summer of 1996, an abandoned campfire south of Bandelier blew sparks under the ponderosa pine forest, and it became the 17,000 acre dome fire. I have to share with you some of my favorite fire pictures here. You'd probably appreciate them more in the wintertime. You could come up and warm your hands to them. But the dome fire was a major firestorm that killed thousands of acres of forest, raging across Upper Bandelier and the Santa Fe National Forest. A skilled U.S. Forest Service incident management team barely managed to stop the fire at Upper Frijoles Canyon. If they hadn't, the dome fire likely would have burned into Los Alamos. Dr. Allen spent most of his career beginning in the 1980s studying the Jemez Mountains. He figured out the fire history of the Jemez by sampling fire scars all over the mountain range. His reconstruction of past fire helped fire managers understand that they need to try to restore forest conditions that prevailed before the onslaught of livestock grazing and fire suppression. Beginning in the 1970s, the National Park Service developed a national policy of putting fire back into its natural place in the national parks. This policy had its roots in research done in the big national parks in the Sierra Nevada, Yosemite, and Sequoia National Parks. This is a picture I took on a burn in Yosemite. You can see the size of the trees there. Extensive studies in the Jemez Mountains show that almost every acre in the Jemez Mountains was burning every 5 to 20 years before 1900. And starting in 1980, Bandelier started to reintroduce fire to correct this damage, or to correct what we call the fire deficit. And they had good results with 67 prescribed fires, and Cerro Grande was the only mishap they had. Thus, the National Park Service crews at Cerro Grande were reintroducing fire into Upper Bandelier landscape consistent with national policy of the National Park Service. But Bandelier is an island among lands managed by the Santa Fe National Forest, the Laboratory, and the Valles Caldera. Problem was that the national forest land north of Bandelier and close to Los Alamos was in worse shape than the burn unit itself was. It was thick with needles and logs and thickets of small trees over thousands of acres for the reasons I just discussed. The Park Service crew wanted to remove debris and kill lots of small trees so future fires coming from the south towards Los Alamos would run out of fuel in the treated area. But they were trying to hold the fire inside an assigned area without natural features such as old roads or boundaries. Remember that Cerro Grande mountain area had been purchased from the Baca ranch owners back in 1978. And the land had been heavily grazed and logged by the Baca ranch people before the Park Service got it. So it was an ecologically disturbed area. After the dome fire, Bandelier had two big units, or this is a picture, by the way, of the top of Cerro Grande. This is where the prescribed fire started, was done up here in these grasslands. And we're looking off to the south. The Sandias are down there, and you can see Highway 4 down here in the bottom. So after the dome fire, Bandelier had two big units. So what Bandelier did was they broke up the whole park into units, and units were areas that needed some kind of treatment, and the units were defined by conditions, ecological conditions, or topography, or that kind of thing, or elevation. One was on the south side of the base of Cerro Grande, and this area went up to the Forest Service boundary. So what's interesting about the Park Service, their boundary with the Santa Fe National Forest runs right across the top of the mountain here. So there's no natural, it's a political boundary. It's not a topographic or ecological boundary. So then they had, at that point, it was the Baca Ranch to the west. The other area was the Upper Frijoles Canyon area. This may be a little hard to see, but this is the main part of Bandelier, and this is what we call the new acquisition up here, which is the land that they bought from the Baca, the Dunnigan family. So these were the units I'm talking about here, the Upper Frijoles Canyon unit and the Cerro Grande unit. And then this is the Valles Caldera over here, and this is the Santa Fe National Forest going this way. So these are the upper burn units that the Park Service was really worried about. The Upper Frijoles Canyon area that extends from Graduation Flats on Forest Road 289 to Highway 4 along the top of the canyon. The Upper Frijoles unit was considered a difficult and risky area for prescribed burning, but it needed to be burned to reduce fuels and restore watershed health. So I'm talking about the very top end of Frijoles Canyon up there where it abuts the rim of the caldera. Wildfire in this area could exhibit extreme fire behavior given the topography. Given how complex this burn unit would be, Park Service staff decided to burn the Cerro Grande unit first because it was between Los Alamos and the Upper Frijoles unit, and it would provide a buffer for Los Alamos. So here's a picture of the Upper Frijoles Canyon, and this is after both Cerro Grande and Las Conchas. So this is pretty much what we see today, but it's a very deep canyon. It's about 600 feet deep up there. For the record, the Upper Frijoles burn unit was ultimately ignited in 2007 with a robust staff of fire people from all over the West. State crews and National Park Service crews from the region joined Forest Service crews. It was a highly successful burn, and I was fortunate to be able to work on that fire. When the Las Conchas fire, this is actually a picture I took on that burn. We were burning at night, and you can see us holding the fire, keeping an eye on it in the middle of the night. When the Las Conchas fire roared into Upper Frijoles Canyon in 2211, the fire behavior of Las Conchas was moderated by the fuel treatment that we had done in 07. But Las Conchas still burned too hot in Upper Frijoles Canyon. So let's look at the Cerro Grande burn briefly so we can see how prescribed fires are executed and what went wrong. This is sort of the story that people are always asking about. People ask me how firefighters keep a prescribed fire under control. Of course, they don't always, but in most cases, prescribed fires are successful and do what their managers want. When fighting wildland fire is a combination of science and warfare, but prescribed fire is more of an art driven by science and experience. In a nutshell, prescribed burners understand how weather affects fire behavior based on extensive research by fire scientists over decades. They know generally how fire behaves in various fuel types, and they can predict with some accuracy how fire will act on a particular landscape depending on what the weather is like and when they plan to burn. They look at the aspect, slope, fuel types, elevation, all that kind of thing. They look at relative humidity, wind direction and speed and temperature over the burn period. They look at weather forecasts well into the near future. All this comes down into a matrix, and when they are a matrix of complexity, and from this complexity, they decide how many people and what equipment they will need to help light and hold the fire, and how long they will need to do the work. So, next thing that fire managers do is they create boundaries for the fire using roads, cliffs, lines dug in the ground into the dirt by firefighters, and other methods. In the 07 Upper Frijoles burn, we had 100 interagency firefighters, including 8 engines, 1 helicopter, and several water tenders. Water tenders are those big water trucks that are able to provide water to firefighters. It was an expensive operation, but it worked. We burned out the upper end of the canyon, improved ecology, and had only minor control problems that were routine at best. And the vegetation up in the upper canyon thrived until the Las Conchas fire came along. Cerro Grande was another issue. I read volumes of investigative reports, talked to most of the main players in the burn and the subsequent wildfire, and I got a pretty good sense of what went wrong. The Park Service had a group of fire people who were based at Bandelier, and they still have their fire station over there that you can see when you're driving from the back gate down towards Bandelier. In 2000, they had 12 people who could ignite the fire, and they had a group of 20 firefighters from the Northern Pueblos Agency who came to help them on their first afternoon. The idea was to burn a swath of grass along the top of the burn unit and put it out so that they had an area of burn fuel to stop the advance of the fire from below over the next few days of igniting the whole burn area. So here we are looking at Cerro Grande here, and what they were doing was they were going to light a black line along the top of the fire like this. And actually this is a little deceiving because this is the other boundary of the burn right here. It doesn't extend over into here, but this was the burn unit here. So here's the highway down below here. We call this Alliers Curve here in Forest Road 289, and today the Cerro Grande trail goes up like that. So here's the interior of the burn, and they were working along on this edge over here. They had hauled water up from the highway, but they're on their backs to help squelch the fire. They did not bring any trucks up to the top of the mountain. Everything was done on foot and by hand. On May 4th, they lit the fire at 7 p.m. in the evening. As they moved to the east and the west, they were putting the fire out on the bottom edge of their black line. So what they did was they started burning up here, and they brought a line of fire down this way and another line of fire down this way. This is actually steeper than it looks in this photo. This was grass, so what they were able to do is light the upper edge of it, and then somebody would come along behind them and put the fire out below, so that you then had a band of black, burned out grass that wouldn't light again. So that's what they were doing. This is called black lining. So they did this for the next, for a few hours. On May 4th, they eventually got exhausted from doing this work, and about 10:30, they stopped putting out the lower edge of the burn, the lower edge of their black line. So they had planned to keep swatting out the bottom edge so they had a nice black line, but they got too tired and they didn't have enough people. So they started to let the bottom edge of the fire creep down into the burn unit without anybody supervising it. So this is in the dark of night. They burned at night because fire is usually less active at night. But now they had departed from their burn plan to have an extinguished black line around the top of the fire. Now they're actually lighting the inside of the burn unit. By midnight, everyone was tired, and the Northern Pueblo crew was completely exhausted. You know, you have to keep in mind that they had been bringing supplies up all day long, back and forth from the highway, carrying stuff up. So everybody was really tired at this point. 3 people left for rest, and those remaining kept an eye on the fire and tried to keep their black lining ahead of the advancing fire down the hill. So they're trying to keep up with the fire as it creeps down on its own, trying to keep along with it. They had to let the Northern Pueblo crew go because they were too tired to continue. So those 20 people left and walked off the mountain and were gone for good. They knew they needed more help, but they didn't have anyone to call immediately. In fire, you either have people on the fire, or you have people that you have identified that you can call. Bandolier staff had called Santa Fe National Forest Dispatch a few days earlier, and dispatch had told them that certain people and apparatus were available to come when called. These were called contingency resources. That's what they call them in the business, contingency resources. And Bandolier was counting on them actually being available when they called them. The burn boss called Santa Fe Dispatch at 3 in the morning and asked the person who answered the phone for a crew of 20 hotshots to come right away and to help contain the fire. The dispatcher heard that it was a prescribed burn and said he couldn't send a crew without higher-up approval, and that they should call back at regular business hours. This is not what they had been told when they had identified contingency resources a couple of days earlier. This turned out to be a major turning point in the fire. As the crews on the mountain were exhausted and understaffed, and no help was coming for a long time. At 7 a.m., Santa Fe Dispatch called back and told the burn boss, and the burn boss asked for a helicopter and a 20-person hotshot crew. Dispatch responded that he would see what he could do, and it would be hard to do, but he would try. The problem was that the U.S. Forest Service wanted the fire to be declared a wildfire, not a prescribed fire, before they would be able to pay for the resources they sent. John Romero, the fire dispatcher, did his best to find a way to dispatch suppression resources to a prescribed fire being done by a different agency. So this is the Forest Service and the Park Service. It took an experience to pull this off, but he did it. And the way he did it was the Forest Service had been fighting a fire up by Wahi Canyon called the Wahi Fire. And he charged these crews to the Wahi Fire account and hoped nobody would notice, but it was the only thing he could do because he realized he had an emergency on his hands. So that's how he got around that problem. It was 5.5 hours until the Santa Fe hotshots arrived at Cerro Grande. And by then the fire had spotted outside the fire line on the east side. So like I said, this is the boundary. So they were working their way down this little ridge here. And if you go and look at this sharp curve here, you can look up here and see how steep this little ridge here, this photo is sort of deceiving. So they were working their way down over here, and they were starting to get spot fires off into this area here. Meanwhile, there were other people that were what we call dragging fire down here. Here you can see the Valle San Antonio back here and the Valle Grande over here. At 10:30, the Sandia helicopter from the Cibola National Forest arrived and supplied 2 more firefighters, and then they went in the helicopter to get its 400-gallon bucket to dump water on the spot fire. They got the water from a cattle pond in the Valle Grande, but realized after one load that they didn't have permission from the Baca Ranch owners to do this. So they started to go get water from Cochiti Reservoir, which was quite a ways farther away. Bandolier staff was trying not to declare the fire a wildfire at this time. It was a major black mark on an organization's reputation to have a prescribed fire get out of control, and they still felt that they could maybe contain it and finish the burn. But then the winds had picked up above what the National Weather Service had predicted, and the winds were pushing the fire towards the northeast. So the problem that we always have up here is this is the little pass that the highway goes through as it drops down into the Valle Grande. And the winds tend to come out of here this direction to the east. And they were doing that this day, and they started to pick up. The winds were really going this direction, and they started to pick up quite a bit. New spot fires were appearing over the fire line on the northeast side of the burn, and they were starting to exhibit what we call extreme fire behavior. The hotshots and their supervisors strongly urged the burn boss to declare the fire a wildfire so they could get virtually unlimited resources to fight the fire. Hotshots said that they needed a slurry bomber to drop a strip of retardant on the east side. You don't call slurry bombers for prescribed fires. And at this point, Bandelier's top staff declared the fire a wildfire and admitted their defeat. It was 19 hours from when the first match had been lit. So again, we're having spot fires out in the woods here and off in the woods here. That was the problem. And they didn't have any natural barrier. There was nothing to hold these fires if they kept going this direction, nothing to contain them. So there was a real worry. By the next morning, on May 7th, there were more hot shots and more retardant loads hitting the fire on its unruly east side. Earlier than that, they had asked for a slurry bomber, but it had taken about 6 hours for it to arrive because it had mechanical problems on its way up from Albuquerque, and they ultimately ended up getting one from Silver City. So these are the little things that just added up to cause this fire to get out of control. By 4 in the afternoon, the Mormon Lake hotshots were working their way down the west side. They're coming down this ridge here, bringing fire down this way, creating a line here. This was not as much of a worry because the winds are going this way. So this fire was blowing into the unit, and they had these other people over here that were there to catch it if it went across the unit. By the next morning, there were more than 20 spot fires outside the line. The crews working carefully down the east side toward the highway. Meanwhile, the Mormon Lake hotshots reached the highway with their fire line. It was about noon on May 8th at this point. So the Mormon Lake hotshots wrapped up their operation right by the highway here. So they had a good fire line down here. Meanwhile, people are struggling over on this side. At this point, things got scary very fast. 2 things happened at once. The wind picked up substantially and blew the fire off the base of the west fire line to the southeast. So here's the base of the west fire line. The wind suddenly got up into the 35 to 40 mile an hour range, and they blew the fire across here, and you can see it. This photograph, by the way, was taken after Cerro Grande, and you can actually see a little bit of it still burning up here. So the fire blew across here, and it blew down into Upper Frijoles Canyon. So this is a steep canyon bowl here. So here comes this wave of fire coming down, and it sits itself down here, and they start working like crazy to try and contain this because this is not a good thing. Meanwhile, they're still working on spot fires up here. So the fire had burned down into Frijoles Canyon below the hairpin turn on the highway. Meanwhile, the wind created a new spot fire on the upper east line that quickly got out of control, and that spot fire rapidly burned to the north, crossing the ridge above Water Canyon and burning towards Los Alamos and the Camp May Road. Suddenly, the fire was no longer only on Cerro Grande, and it was racing to the north. So what we had happen here was a spot fire had gotten going over in here, and we had this fire down in the bottom of the canyon. This fire picked up and ran like this, and you can still see this scar all the way up here from where it got up and ran this way. And then there was this other spot fire up here that took off and ran towards Los Alamos. So this was when things got substantially out of control. So if you look closely at the photo, you can see how a little black there is in the burn unit itself. So here's the prescribed fire burn unit. And this was just a few days later. And you can see that there's some black down in here. They lit this with a helicopter in here. But you can see there's very little burning that actually happened inside the burn unit. The main burning happened outside of the park on the National Forest land. So once the fire got off the mountain and was racing towards Los Alamos, various crews raced towards Camp May Road to meet the fire as it came up to the edge of Los Alamos Canyon on May 7th. So those fire crews burned out some of the woods right next to the Camp May Road so that they would have a burned off area so that when the fire approached and reached them, it would hit land that was already burned. And meanwhile, they were also burning along the highway between the back gate and the base of the Ski Hill Road. Everybody was cautiously relieved because it appeared the fire was calming down at this point. A helicopter had been dousing fires with its bucket from the Los Alamos Reservoir at this point. Meanwhile, other firefighters were working along West Jemez Road. By then, a Type 1 Incident Command team had been ordered from Arizona and was taking over under Larry Humphrey. And Larry is one of the best firefighting strategists in the Southwest. He's retired now, but he was really well known as a truly great incident commander. He is one who has helped stop the dome fire from crossing Frijoles Canyon in 1996. So he assumed control over the 2 days. The fire lingered on the south side of Los Alamos Canyon. The fire remained calm until a new cold front came across the region, raising wind speeds and making the fire flare up. And at this point, I remember I was sitting on the side of Los Alamos Canyon. This, by the way, is a picture that was taken from TA-49 of, here's Cerro Grande up here, and here you can see all of that land between, between Cerro Grande and Parito Mountain. This is burning in that interim day there. Okay. So I was sitting on the north side of Los Alamos Canyon watching much of this action on May 7th. Western area was evacuated on Sunday. I was helping an elderly friend gather his things and leave his house while air tankers were rumbling above. So this is an interesting photo here. This is the Camp May Road, obviously. Here's Parito Mountain. And this was taken a couple of days after the fire, like probably May 12th or something like that. And you can see this is the problem up here. The fire had started to boil up in Upper Parito Canyon, which is about over here, and it came running across here, and it crossed the fire line that the firefighters had established here. And once it got down into Los Alamos Canyon, it created this huge burn area on the north-facing slopes. There you can see Los Alamos Reservoir down there. And then it got onto these south-facing slopes and just ran towards Los Alamos. On May 10th, 30-mile-an-hour winds blew a new head of fire that had developed in Upper Parito Canyon across Camp May Road and into Los Alamos Canyon. As I just said, the fire was unstoppable, and the fire burned across the canyon into the woods above Western area and started to run on the north in thickets on the west side of town. Its head grazed North Community at 4:30 in the afternoon on May 10th, burning houses on 47th and 48th Streets and burning multiple houses on Arizona Avenue. The Los Alamos Fire Department, assisted by other departments from around the state, could not keep up with the burning houses as each house set the one next door to it on fire. There were also spot fires happening around Los Alamos where embers were dropping into random places in town and starting random houses on fire, which was making things especially difficult. By this time, the town was completely evacuated. Fire investigators realized that many of the houses, especially on the edge of the community, were ignited by low ground fire creeping on the ground rather than a large flame front. So we had fire that was creeping in pine needles up into people's backyards and then setting their houses on fire. The flame front, meanwhile, roared off to the north towards Santa Clara Canyon, where it did serious damage to the Santa Clara watersheds and the Santa Clara community. So here you can see, This is LA Mountain. I don't know if people call it that anymore. Those of us who've been around for more than 100 years call it LA Mountain. It used to have a big LA up here. So here the fire came like this, and these are residential streets up here. And it burned down into these residential streets here. Arizona Avenue is over here, running off the photo here. So the major damage in the community was up in this neighborhood here. The fire hit LA Mountain and it started to do a sort of a barrel roll thing because of this line of mountains. And that funneled a lot of heat down here into this neighborhood. Just a footnote. That's sort of the story of Cerro Grande. That's sort of the story of how the fire got out of control, the mistakes that were made, things that went south on the fire crews, what caused the fire to exceed expectations and misbehave as badly as it did. And after it ran off towards Santa Clara Canyon, they'd already had a second Type 1 incident command team up in Espanola, so they had two Type 1 incident command teams that were managing the fire at this point, and it sort of ran off into those second groups area. This is a picture that my friends and I took from the top of the Santa Fe ski area of the Hermit Peak Calf Canyon fire, and this is the one that's on the cover of my book. This was in 2022. And this fire was, as I've described, a real problem on the other side of the valley here. The prescribed fire that the Pecos Las Vegas Ranger District of the Santa Fe National Forest did in April 2022 was almost an exact repeat of the mistakes that were made at the Cerro Grande fire. I guess those firefighters hadn't read my book. The Forest Service, if you go over there, I think everybody here knows where Hermit Peak is. It's over between Santa Fe and Las Vegas. It's a big, beautiful mountain that sits off by itself over there. The Forest Service has sent a crew of 31 people out to burn 1,200 acres in a dry, windy area near Las Vegas, New Mexico. Just like Cerro Grande, they started the burn around the top of their sloping burn unit near the El Porvenir campground. They had a crew on each side of the unit burning down the hill, just like Cerro Grande. Within an hour, they had spot fires outside the control lines, and people were pulled off the fire line to run around putting out their spot fires. Eventually, some of these spot fires got too big to fight by hand, and they called for aerial support. But just like at Cerro Grande, it was early in the fire season, and the helicopters and air tankers were not locally available yet. Within 4 hours, they declared their prescribed fire a wildfire, and it roared away towards Las Vegas, ultimately burning 341,000 acres and burning 900 structures. And this fire was vastly more expensive than the Cerro Grande fire in the end. This was the Hermit Peak Calf Canyon fire. And so it took 19 hours for Cerro Grande to be declared a wildfire. It took 4 hours for the Las Despensas prescribed fire to be declared a wildfire. Uh-oh, they're coming for me. Where's the back door? Overall, prescribed burning is a necessary and critical tool for land managers working to restore our abused and degraded public lands. But it must be done with adequate personnel, and it must be timed exactly carefully in terms of current and future weather and fuel conditions. More than 90% of prescribed fires go off without any problems. But we need to focus on what is happening in our environment to make these fires so extremely destructive to our forests. We are seeing hundreds of thousands of acres of forest converted into brush and grass, probably permanently in many cases. Just off the white part of the screen here, you can see it's 1900 here. These are the dates, 1925, 1950, 1975, 2002, and 2025. So here are the fluctuations in temperatures over the years, and the mean temperature is here in this red line here. So you can see that it's gone up substantially from the time we talk about overgrazing affecting the land here all the way up until the present here. The average temperatures are rising substantially. Not only are we seeing these big fires like Las Conchas and Hermit Peak, but we're also seeing mass die-offs of trees in New Mexico and Colorado. Bark beetles kill tens of millions of trees because the trees are weak from warming and drying of the climate. Fire and bark beetles go hand in hand, and other diseases like dwarf mistletoe are killing trees as well. Recent research finds that 50% of the forests between Wyoming and northern New Mexico have died due to temperature-related mortality. Some scientists predict that most of our forests will be dead in the Southwest by 2050. The climate is getting warmer largely because of people burning fossil fuels and the air pollution that results. There are other factors too. But none of this is news to you. As air temperatures rise, the air can hold more water vapor, and evaporation from trees and soil increases. In the Southwest, where relative humidity is already abnormally low, the evaporation from trees is worse than it would be in a humid area. So we're seeing living trees being stressed as the warmer atmosphere evaporates more water from the tree's leaves than the soil and the roots can supply to the tree. This is called the vapor deficit. And if the trees experience high temperatures with drought, then their water plumbing system in the tree fails and the tree dies. What happens is you have a column of water that's running up the xylem in the tree, and if it gets interrupted because the atmosphere is sucking more water out of the tree than the soil can provide, then you get a gap in the tree, in the water in the cambium, and that kills the tree. Larger trees are more vulnerable to vapor pressure deficit, and Nate McDowell here at Los Alamos National Laboratory has been pinpointing the exact physiological mechanism of tree death related to high temperatures and water vapor pressure deficits. At the same time, the dry soils and dry living trees lead to ideal conditions for hot active fires. As temperatures increase, fires become more active, and scientists are seeing the size and severity of fires increasing with temperature and more frequent wind events. As temperature increases, the atmosphere is more unstable and wind increases, making for firestorms like Las Conchas and Cerro Grande. Let's hold off on that for a minute. These realities affect all forests in the West right now. We are seeing giant sequoia that are 3,500 years old succumb to fire in the Sierra Nevada. A 3,000-year-old alligator bark juniper was killed in Upper Bandelier National Monument by the Las Conchas fire. So when you think about that, if that tree hadn't experienced a fire that severe in 3,000 years, I bet you didn't know there were junipers that old around here. So the ferocity of these firestorms is unprecedented. Las Conchas was a much bigger firestorm than Cerro Grande. It started from a tree falling on an electrical power line southwest of the Valles Caldera National Preserve on June 26 in 2011. Bandelier's engine crews were the first on scene, and they did their best to contain the fire, but it got in the treetops almost immediately and burned 46,000 acres in one day. It was burning an acre per second. And when you go to the Valle Grande today, you can look up on the rim up above the highway there, and you can see where that run was happening. It ran right towards Los Alamos, and then it split into two heads, one running towards Cochiti Canyon to the south, and the other running north along the mountains above Los Alamos. And importantly, had the Cerro Grande fire scar not acted as a buffer, the Las Conchas fire most likely would have hit Los Alamos directly from the west and caused much greater ferocity and damage to the community than Cerro Grande fire had years earlier. The thing about the Cerro Grande fire is it was running pretty much straight north, whereas Las Conchas was running towards the east. But putting our heads in the sand and following people who deny global warming is not going to work out for humanity. The longer we delay, dealing with the situation, the more it will cost in lives and money. We need to stick with our science and act together regardless of short-term political problems. We don't have time for backtracking, and I would say that one thing that's important to notice is that Los Alamos National Laboratory has been a real leader on this topic of climate science, and I hope that they're able to continue to do that work. I'm going to change the subject slightly here. I want to talk briefly about our public lands and our national parks. In this talk, I've discussed our national forests and our national parks in the history of these big fires that affected all of us. And I've been critical of our agencies, and at the same time, I'm extremely supportive of these agencies. The idea of public lands is uniquely American. It's an excellent idea, but things are changing fast for these agencies. The agency world I describe in my book, and that we've all experienced over decades, may be changing radically in the near future. Here in Los Alamos, we have 3 units of the National Park System that are protect and explain our national heritage, and they provide a big boost to our national economy, our local economy rather, and our national economy. The National Park Service has been a continuous tradition of systematic protection of the most important cultural and historic sites in the United States for the last 109 years. National Park Service manages 85 million acres in 433 sites. I just have some random signs of places that Monique and I have gone together. The park system is a repository of our most important places, of our history and our natural world. The parks include small historic sites like the Minuteman Missile National Historic Park in South Dakota. Has anybody been there? All right, see, 4 people have been there. It's a very interesting place. It's right near the Badlands National Park. And the Park Service also manages huge parks like Yellowstone and the Gates of the Arctic in Alaska, which is one of the biggest wild areas in the world. We steward these places and hand them to the next generation. We have a pact with our ancestors and our future generations to preserve and protect these lands. Bandelier is experiencing record visitation this year, and overall the National Park System hosted 332 million people last year, with economic benefits for all the local communities, including places like Los Alamos. So what if I told you that it was likely that Bandelier, the Valles Caldera, and the Manhattan Project National Historic Park could close in the next 2 years? According to Trump's 2026 budget, the National Park Service would face a 75% budget cut, which could cause the National Park Service to close 350 of its 433 park units. Under this, already we're losing national and regional office staff, and at some point, the Park Service can no longer function. Outdoor recreation supports a $1.2 trillion economy in the West and sustains 5 million jobs, powering local businesses and communities like Los Alamos. We've all seen what is happening to various federal agencies and research groups under this administration. They're making big staff cuts at the Veterans Administration, the Social Security Administration, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, U.S. Forest Service, and the National Science Foundation. Oh, by the way, this is Sequoia National Park in the Southern Sierras, and these trees are between 3,000 and 4,000 years old. Already, the Park Service has lost this year 3,500 employees in the last 3 months nationally. And most experts agree that the Park Service was already working on a bare-bones staff with an inadequate budget. Yet polls show that 70% of the public, including 60% of Republican voters, want public lands protected. The Park Service budget is 1/15 of 1% of the federal budget. So these cuts are not about efficiency or fiscal restraint. Now we learn that the U.S. Geologic Survey that provides the science for the National Park Service at Bandelier and the Valles Caldera is losing most of its staff now. The national parks are managed by teams of experts from natural resource managers, scientists, maintenance, educational staff, law enforcement, rangers. And these lands are owned by all Americans. And no one administration should dismantle what generations of Americans have put together and maintained for our children's children. I sense there's a big backlash brewing in this country now. But anyway, all of that aside, we've come full circle. When we think about the evolution of the understanding of fire on the landscape, we can look back to the 1905 when all fire was bad, and we had the 1910 fires up in the Northern Rockies, which was a huge firestorm that nearly destroyed not only lots of landscape, but it almost ruined the new Forest Service at that point. We can think about the 1970s when Harold Biswell was introducing fire back into the landscape at Sequoia National Park. Fire science is a big field, and it underlies most of the work that the Forest Service and the Park Service does nationally. We need to maintain science in our country in all fields and at all levels. We cannot let one administration damage this public trust. There's Mesa Verde in the Research Center. So I hope we can all work together and hold on to our public lands. Thank you.
All right, well, we're going to open it up for some questions if you'd like to. I'm going to hook up another microphone. I'm going to leave this one for you. Any questions, or was he that thorough?
There's one over there.
My understanding is that as part of the equation in the fire scenarios that you discussed, which are really massive fire systems that affect atmospheric conditions locally and transform them, part of the issue in the Cerro Grande and the other fires was the establishment of wind response, atmospheric responses to the fire itself, so that contributed to predictions of wind direction, etc., going astray, because in fact you're setting up an entire atmospheric system. And I know there's modeling going on at Los Alamos, among other places, that models this in 3D and has modeled the Cerro Grande and other fires. And have you had a chance to see these models or discuss what your feelings are about their robustness in being able to either capture it or one day help capture and manage real time some fires like this?
I've looked most closely at Las Conchas, because Las Conchas, they did a lot of studies about how the fire in particular was behaving to be as ferocious and as large, high severity burn as it was. Basically what we see is I showed that picture of those boiling clouds over the Sangre de Cristos. Once fires get a certain head of steam, they start to create pyrocumulus clouds and an updraft that pulls air in and creates its own winds. And I think that's a lot of what people are talking about. The problem is a lot of times those big columns of smoke will collapse and then the wind will reverse direction and go in the opposite way. And it's a very dangerous situation for firefighters. But yeah, fires create their own weather in a big way. And I think that's what modeling is proving now. But they're able to model now and get down to very fine detail on fire behavior related to these pyrocumulus clouds and the way that the big heat events are happening. Yeah, I've looked at that some, but not as much as a lot of these other people have.
So you were mentioning about the mistletoe, and I guess it was last summer, the summer before, Ralph and I were up in the Sangre de Cristos and Pecos, and the amount of mistletoe was astounding. And as we're driving along just the main road, and trees on both sides were infested with it. And then I've noticed this year, driving along State Road 4, going up to the Jemez, I'm starting to see mistletoe. And my impression, I don't know if it's just conversations with you that are making me more aware of it, so I'm noticing it, but my impression is that it's coming in and it's really taking over. And I guess my question is, am I noticing this correctly, number one, and number two, other than having it rain, is there anything else that could be done to get rid of the mistletoe?
So mistletoe, I think all of us are familiar with mistletoe that you kiss somebody under at Christmas time, and those are generally mistletoes that grow on oaks, and mistletoe grows on every tree species, not every tree species, but many tree species have their own species of mistletoe that are particular to them. It's a parasitic plant that attaches to the plant and it reproduces, but it's like a cancer. It gets into the plant's growth system and it injects chemicals that confuse the growth of the tree and ultimately sap its strength. It pulls out too much energy. It's just like a cancer where you get a tumor that's taking all the energy from the body and putting it into the tumor. So the same thing is happening with the parasitic plant. And it takes a while, but it kills the trees. And the fact that trees are weakened now, they're dry, as I discussed, is causing them to be more vulnerable to mistletoe. Mistletoe is spread, it's able to spread its own seeds from tree to tree, but it also, birds spread it from tree to tree. So that it's possible for it to spread over large areas. But again, it's just like bark beetles and that sort of thing. If the tree is healthy and got a lot of water in it and it's having a good time, it's able to fight off things like mistletoe and they aren't a big problem. But when they're weak, when the tree is weak from drought or whatever, it will be worse. But yeah, we are seeing a lot more mistletoe. I live on the east side of Santa Fe and we are seeing more and more mistletoe killing the ponderosa pine on the mountainsides above Santa Fe.
As we drive through the forest, we see these slash piles, and so slash burning is different than a prescribed fire. My understanding is sometimes they'll sit there and smolder for months. Is that right? And what kind of monitoring program is there to keep an eye on these things?
Well, there's a better one now than there used to be. I've worked on several pile burn operations, both in the mountains above Santa Fe and up in the Valles Caldera, and we always do it in the wintertime. And the deal is what happens is they hire crews to come in and thin the forest and get rid of those thickets I was talking about, and they pile them up into different piles, and they let them sit for about 2 years until the needles are cured and it's nice and brown. And then you go when there's out there in snow and poor stiffs like me wander around. I'm retired now, by the way, I don't do this anymore, but we would wander around on these steep slopes covered with these piles, and you ignite each pile one by one with a crew of people. Generally, because it's cold, it's midwinter, the piles tend to burn themselves out, and you generally don't have to worry about it. Now, up in the Calf Canyon fire up in the Sangre de Cristos, it seemed like there wasn't enough snow cover because they had piles that had smoldered into the spring. When the snow melted, they ignited or one of them ignited and started to spread sparks in the wind off, and that was one of the 2 sources of the Hermit Peak Calf Canyon fire. That, I think, is very unusual. But with the drying of the atmosphere and the warming of the climate, there's probably going to see more of that. And I think we never really monitored the burns, the pile burnings that we did up in the caldera or in Bandelier. People would go look at them, but you didn't really have problems with them. They would go up. But we also had a lot of snowfall. If you do them in a thin snowpack, it would be more risky. But I think they're going to keep an eye on them a lot more now, because that was a major problem.
Any other questions?
Many years ago, we were driving on New Mexico 126 from Panhandle to Cuba, and there was a tree, tall tree, kind of in a group of trees, and it was on fire. Obviously, lightning strike from the day before or something. What's the frequency of a lightning strike like that on an individual tree? Is it unusual for them not to spread, or is it dependent entirely upon wind and other factors?
Yeah, you're right. It's having lightning start trees on fire is relatively common. By the way, I couldn't find a good graphic, but Craig Ellen has got wonderful graphics of lightning frequency in the Jemez Mountains. It's astounding how many lightning strikes hit the ground every year, and very few of them start a fire. But when they do, generally unless you have a tremendous amount of wind that will blow sparks off of the tree and start the ground on fire, generally they'll just stay in one area, and usually they get addressed by firefighters. Sometimes they use lightning strikes to do prescribed fires, because they say, oh, look at this, it's a natural burn, conditions are good, it's in a good place, we've got people available, we're going to deal with it that way. Yes, I think it's relatively uncommon, but you're right, you've got the right idea.
Anyone else? Alrighty, we've got some of his new version of the book for sale back there. Tom will be signing books here for the next little while. I wanted to thank TechSource again for sponsoring our 24-25 season. Real quick though, get your singing voices ready, because I'm going to embarrass Tom. It's his birthday, so on 3. 1, 2, 3. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Tom. Happy birthday to you.
Thank you. Somebody up here's got a beautiful voice.